Resistance training is not just for athletes and bodybuilders. It's truly one of the best tools that we have for our long-term health. And I really want women in particular to think of muscle as our hormonal ally, right? It helps us age well. And I think it's really about wanting to inspire women that it's not about getting smaller, it's about getting stronger. And that strength really ripples into other areas of your life.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Mary Ellen Tedeschi, Naturopathic Doctor and Clinic Lead at our Ancaster Clinic, and I am joined today by Dr. Laura Carabott, another one of our naturopathic doctors in Ancaster, and she is here to talk about a very important topic today, all about muscle, especially why muscle matters more than ever for women's health in perimenopause and beyond. So today, not only are we going to get an inside look into Dr. Laura's journey into naturopathic medicine, but we are going to learn about why women tend to gain weight during this life stage, how muscle impacts your metabolism, your hormones, bone health, insulin, and overall quality of life, what kind of exercise actually works, and how to fuel your body for strength, energy, and long-term health. So Laura, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's dive right in with you telling us a little bit about how you became to be a naturopathic doctor.
Hi, Dr. Mary Ellen. Yes, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to talk about this topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So a bit of background about me. I grew up living a very active childhood and teenage life. Softball was my main sport growing up. So summers were quite busy traveling to different tournaments and showcases across Canada and the States. And this really sparked my love and interest for how the human body moves. So that led me to pursue a degree in kinesiology from Western University. And then following that, I worked as a personal trainer for a year. And so working as a personal trainer is really where I was able to hone in on my skills from, nutrition and the exercise piece. But it's really where I also learned how much I love the coaching aspect and really working one-on-one with women. And I was finding in those consult rooms, though, there was always so much more than just, a woman wanting to lose body fat or a woman wanting to put on muscle, right? It was, she also maybe was experiencing a lot of stress, or maybe she had a thyroid concern that, was really debilitating for her. And all to say, I just wanted to learn more about the human body. And so that led me to pursue a degree in naturopathic medicine. And then many years later, here we are now, and I'm lucky to be one of the practitioners at the Ancaster location. So, yeah.
Awesome. And we absolutely love having you on the team and the skill set that you bring, especially with your personal training background. And I'm just so excited to dive into this topic because, as you know, and as many of my patients know, of course, perimenopause and menopause health is near and dear to my heart. So I think it's only natural that we begin with, diving into why women gain weight in perimenopause and menopause. And then we'll get into the good stuff about how muscle mass and muscle health can actually help.
Absolutely.
So why don't we talk about some of the causes for weight gain in perimenopause and menopause?
For sure. So we can start by, of course, looking at the hormonal shifts that start to happen. So as estrogen, begins to decline, we start to see that metabolism begins to slow. And this is where we store fat also starts to shift. So this is when often women start to notice more of that weight gain kind of in that midsection area. We also see an increase in visceral fat, which is the fat that surrounds our organs. And so this is the fat that can be linked to more inflammation, more, metabolic concerns. So that's definitely some shifts that we start to see happen. But also, as we start to see shifts in progesterone, women are also experiencing, more bloating, more water retention, right? So not only is potentially weight gain happening, they're also feeling different, right?
Mhm.
So, what we see here is during perimenopause and menopause, our cells start to become less responsive to insulin. And so, insulin is that very important hormone that our pancreas releases to help regulate our blood sugar. And when our body becomes less sensitive to this hormone, this can lead to elevated levels of circulating insulin. And we can think of this hormone as our fat storage hormone. And so this also is what can, predispose women in this time to start gaining more body fat, right? And it's also, and I'm sure Dr. Mary Ellen, you hear this all the time in your clinic room, is women are, eating the same way and they're moving their bodies the same way, if not more. And they're starting to notice this weight gain happening.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to take home is that women can feel like it's their fault or that they're doing something wrong, or, maybe I'm not moving enough, maybe I'm eating too much. But when we actually zoom out and take a look at all of these different factors, we really get to understand what are the contributing factors that are causing this change in your body, right? And it's often bigger than food and exercise, right? We have to think about the hormonal, inflammatory, gut health, stress perspective. But yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, Laura, is that, even though you're eating the same way, you're exercising the same way, this can happen that we can see these changes in your body and especially in your body composition.
Absolutely. And this is why, it's not just a conversation of calories in, calories out, right? And move more, eat less. It's really all of these hormones that are starting to change and that are driving what's happening in our body. And so, just like you had mentioned, right? Cortisol, that's another hormone that we need to talk about. And so, in this state, we see lots of midlife stress, right? From careers and caregiving and parenting. And when we have, chronically elevated levels of cortisol, this can also, increase our risk for more of that fat storage again in that midsection area. And in turn, it also disrupts our blood sugar regulation, right? So cravings change and our fullness cues change. And this can make it even more challenging for women to feel, like they're able to best manage their weight. We also see disruption in sleep, right? And the hormones that impacts. So, if a woman is starting to experience some insomnia or some night sweats and her sleep's disrupted, we see changes in hormones like ghrelin, right? And that's our hunger hormone. And we see changes in leptin, which is our fullness hormone. So women are finding that, they're craving more and they're maybe not as satisfied after meals. And this can make it even more challenging, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then this leads us into our topic today, and kind of this main point that we're going to focus on is muscle mass and how in our 30s, we actually start to naturally lose muscle mass. And so this is a process called sarcopenia, which is the natural loss of muscle tissue as we age. And so that really begins to accelerate in those perimenopausal transitions. And when we have less muscle mass, this means that our basal metabolic rate is lower. And so our basal metabolic rate is essentially how many calories our body burns at rest. And so this even, furthers our point of even if a woman's habits haven't necessarily changed, right? Their metabolism is changing. And so that is why they can often see a lot of those symptoms starting to present.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the great things about working with a naturopathic doctor like yourself is, you're able to apply that lens or that look on their health, where it might have been calorie focused or exercise focused before. You're able to provide that additional expertise and, that additional lens into how we do things at Advanced Women's Health, focusing on those pillars and understanding how we can see those changes and make those positive shifts that are catered towards that patient's individual needs, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about muscle and why it matters when it comes to weight loss and insulin sensitivity.
For sure. So, well, I like to kind of describe it as muscle is a very expensive tissue. And so, what I mean by that is muscle is very metabolically active. And so, it burns a lot more calories at rest, unlike fat tissue, right? And so what's also really important to know too is our muscle is almost like a big glucose sink. And so it helps to take up glucose from the bloodstream, right? And store it as glycogen to then be used for fuel, right? And to exercise. And so, as we discuss this blood sugar and insulin changes that can start to happen, this is why muscle mass can be so helpful when it comes to body composition. Something that's also really important to note too is with strength training, we have something called excess post exercise oxygen consumption. And so this essentially refers to the additional oxygen that your body consumes after exercise to restore itself to its resting state. And so, what that means is that after a strength training workout, your body continues to burn calories to repair that muscle tissue and replenish those energy stores for up to 24 to 48 hours after. And
Wow.
I remember even back as, a personal trainer, I had so many clients that felt like to lose weight, they had to spend hours on the treadmill, right? And it was really wanting to educate and empower women that, you know, cardio is great, of course, but the minute, let's say, you step off that treadmill, right, your calorie burn is done essentially. Whereas with strength training, of course, we're getting some degree of metabolic burn during a workout, right? But you're also getting that additional calorie burn afterwards, which is why strength training can be a lot more sustainable approach for women. And then the last piece is, again, strength training helps to improve our insulin sensitivity. So even without weight loss, right, muscle mass helps our cells better respond to insulin, which is what, again, makes this such a sustainable approach for women who are looking to see those changes in their bodies.
Absolutely. And I think, like you've mentioned, one of those big takeaways when it comes to exercise, more is not more, right? Like we don't need to be on the stair climber or on the treadmill walking for hours, and breaking that sweat when we're really able to focus on muscle building and preserving our muscle mass. That's going to have so many more benefits, even in addition to the weight loss and body composition change, right? So I'm
Exactly.
excited to get into that more because when we think about it, yes, we've learned, about how that muscle mass and thinking about exercise in a different way and body composition in a different way is important. It is even more important when we think about those changes happening in perimenopause and why supporting that muscle becomes, a key player or a key foundation in our treatment plan. So I know that we're going to chat about, the importance of estrogen and how that supports muscle mass and, improving brain health and all that fun stuff. So why don't we start with, where you want to begin in terms of talking about why muscle is even more important in perimenopause and menopause?
For sure. So we'll start by, reiterating some of the points in terms of estrogen supporting muscle mass, right? So as that estrogen begins to decline, this is accelerating that natural muscle loss that happens with age, right? And what's really important to know with this, which we're going to talk a little bit more in depth later about, is how important muscle mass is for protecting our bones, right? And so this is why weight-bearing exercise really helps to prevent osteoporosis, which essentially becomes more of a concern when a woman is in perimenopause and especially menopause, of course, due to that estrogen drop. We, of course, have already talked about the metabolic shifts that happen, but I think it's really important to also note why it's important for perimenopause and menopause is all of the other benefits that we get from a mental health standpoint, right? So resistance training has been shown to help lower cortisol. It's been shown to help reduce anxiety and ease mood swings. We also see benefit in mental clarity, right? And that's something that we hear so often in our clinic rooms is the brain fog that women are starting to experience. And so movement, but especially strength training, it helps to increase blood flow to the brain, right? So we can see more of that support for memory and focus. We also see better sleep quality. And honestly, probably my favorite tip of all is we see that it builds self-confidence. And why this is so important is because for women, building strength is empowering, right? It's lifting you up. And I think this is incredibly important for women at this stage when they're typically balancing a lot of things in their life and they're caring for a lot of other people around them, right? And I think this is an opportunity to really pour into themselves and help build that self-confidence in themselves.
I love that. And I think that's so important. One of the key things that I want to dive into a little bit more is that bone health aspect. So, how, resistance training and muscle building can actually support your bone health, because that is a super important, topic to think about if you are entering perimenopause, if you've entered menopause early. So whether that was natural menopause or if you've had a hysterectomy, starting to think about these things. If there's a family history of osteoporosis, we really need to focus on that bone health as well. So let's talk about that connection between muscle and bone health.
Absolutely. And so, why muscle and bone connection is so important is because when we lift weights or we do resistance training, we're putting that mechanical stress on our bones. And so, this can actually help stimulate more bone growth, which is especially important in areas like the spine and the hip, right? Where ultimately fractures are going to be most dangerous long term. But strong muscles are also incredibly protective, right? And so they help stabilize those joints, they help improve our posture, and in turn, that helps reduce our risk of falls, which is so incredibly important at this time. And lots of women ask me, okay, so what should I do? Like, where do I begin, right? And I think the biggest thing is we can at least start by focusing on our main, what are called compound lifts or our compound movements, right? So this could be things like a squat. This could be things like a deadlift, a row, or a press. Of course, I would always recommend if someone has never done these movements before, right, to find themselves a coach or a personal trainer, because we want to make sure that you're performing the move correctly. And, we wouldn't want to risk injury, but those compound lifts are going to be incredibly important for building strength because they're requiring so many muscles to be used for that exercise. We also can really utilize body weight movements as well, right? So things like step ups and push ups and planks. There's something incredibly, important about being able to truly just hold up your own body. And so those are some really key foundations that I recommend to patients. And it's also using what you have at home, right? So sometimes women say, oh, I have resistance bands at home, or have any sort of thing that I can, like a load that I can carry. Great, do it, right? And I think what's important for this too is adding any kind of mechanical load to your body is going to give it that extra bit of resistance to challenge it and to make it grow. Pilates and yoga are definitely very common things that, many women are gravitating towards right now, which are amazing for posture and flexibility and balance. And again, it's being able to, lift your own body. I definitely love when we can kind of combine, the Pilates and the yoga with some strength training. But ultimately, it's a conversation I have in my consult room about getting women to do what they love and finding exercise that feels best for them.
I love it. And I think that, one of the key things is the weights don't have to be heavy, right? Like we don't have to be like bench pressing like crazy,
Yes.
100 pounds or like, anything like you said, any load that can help add to that movement is going to support, even if you just start with your body weight, right? Like a great place to
Exactly.
start. Or those resistance bands. I think that we underutilize those, right? So it's a really good
Exactly.
point. Utilize what you have at home and what's accessible around you. And you don't even have to go to a gym to do this.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
And that's the thing too. It's always about, I think, meeting our patients where they're at, right? And someone who's never worked out before, all of a sudden sitting there and telling them to go get, a membership to their gym nearby can be very intimidating. Definitely. So it's about meeting the patient where they're at, becoming creative with what they have at home and really just educating patients on the benefits of resistance training and, moving their body that can really set them up for success long term.
I love that. And then the other thing we have to talk about is, of course, the building blocks for building muscle are
Yes.
protein. So, protein and a high protein diet, these are very much buzzwords today. And I know that when we talk about insulin and insulin resistance or, insulin dysregulation, we often talk about how to appropriately get your protein in within your meals. But even if we start with the basics, because a lot of people don't really know what a protein is or how much they should be aiming for in a day, I think we should shed some light on that. So why don't you tell us kind of like the minimum protein intake that you want your patients to reach in a day?
Yes. And this is such a great question because patients are reading so much online, right? Everyone says something different. And for everyone listening today, I'm going to probably say something different than what you just saw on Instagram, right? But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, so the RDA, which stands for the recommended dietary allowance, is a very modest zero 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So this is about 0.36 grams per pound. But this number is to prevent deficiency state, right? And we want to look at things from more of a health optimization standpoint. So a lot of the research states that aiming between 1.4 to 1.8 grams per kilogram has the most benefits. If someone, let's say, depending on their goals, is maybe, in a calorie deficit, let's just say, or they are lifting very heavy, I might target more of that upper range. But really, what this means is, for example, for about a 64 kilogram patient, they would need about 102 grams of protein a day to really optimize, their lean muscle mass, their bone health, their energy, their focus, and, to really gain those longevity benefits. Getting, a mixture of course, plant-based and animal-based products is best because, we always want to support our microbiome as well and get as much nutrients as we can. But really, I always have the conversation with a patient about how can we space out the protein throughout the day? Because when you hear the total number, that can be extremely daunting for a patient, right? And so it's how can we sneak in protein, to every meal, makes it break down that bigger goal into smaller pieces, which I find really helpful.
So important, right? What are your favorite sources? Because I know, we have like a variety, an abundant amount of protein sources that are animal based. I find it always challenging with our plant based diets. Not that it's impossible, but it definitely can be more of a challenge. So, what are your, preferred protein sources when it comes to, plant based sources? And do you like recommending protein powders?
Yeah, so great question. So at least in the topic of muscle mass, so we do want to focus on those leucine-rich foods. And leucine is a key amino acid for muscle repair. So from a plant-based perspective, we're going to find this in foods like eggs or soy-based products. Our animal-based products, we're going to find this in things like chicken, for example. If I had to say what my favorite plant-based sources of proteins would certainly be legumes, right? So that's our lentils, our chickpeas, our beans. I think things like hemp hearts are a great way to, again, kind of sneak in protein more throughout the day. Of course, I've already mentioned eggs, and even, let's say, adding some additional egg whites to your eggs, right, can be a really great way to get in more protein. As it relates, though, to the protein powder conversation, I do find protein powder extremely helpful to help women meet their daily needs. It can be challenging sometimes to always feel like eggs in the morning and have a chicken breast, at lunch every day and so on and so forth. And so I do find protein powder just can really help someone, meet their needs a little bit easier. I typically go for more of a plant-based option for a protein powder just with the patients that I'm working with, and especially as today we're talking about that perimenopause and menopause age groups, we do recommend more of that plant-based because whey protein does have a greater impact on our insulin levels. And so if that is a concern that we're working on the patient with, we do prefer more of that plant-based option.
I love that. I think that's so helpful. And interesting that you didn't mention cottage cheese as a preferred protein source.
Yes. I mean, truthfully, it's also a textural and personal thing for me. So that is a very biased answer.
Yeah.
that I can't get behind it. But I imagine, yeah, you're going to speak to the dairy
Yeah.
piece, right?
Like, not to hate on cottage cheese, but I just think, as a consumer out there, we're seeing a lot of, add this in, like blend this into your meals to make it high protein. And this is the importance of knowing where your body's at. So knowing your insulin and glucose metabolism and how that's working can help you to understand, should you be adding cottage cheese to things or dairy products to things? Because, as you mentioned about the whey, dairy products are typically more insulin stimulating, right? For some people, totally fine. For others, might not be the best option to have that as your main protein source. So it just goes to show, if you feel like you're following these high protein diets, you're adding cottage cheese or Greek yogurt to everything, and you're really at a standstill with your weight, or you might find that you just keep gaining weight, it's food for thought, to really think about getting an understanding of that baseline insulin glucose and how that's regulating throughout the day, and, seeing where we can improve things and tweak things when it comes to nutrition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
Okay, we talked about protein powder. Another one I'd love for you to tell us about is creatine, because we're seeing a lot of that, not only for muscle mass and muscle recovery, but also in the perimenopause and menopause space, how it's such an important thing to think about. So why don't you tell me, about creatine and how that can be useful in some patients?
Absolutely. So, what creatine is to start, so it's a natural compound made from amino acids that's stored mainly in our muscles. And so, essentially, it helps our muscles produce those quick bursts of energy. So, especially during, shorter or more intense movements like resistance training, right, and lifting weights, this is where creatine can be extremely helpful. We do also make some creatine naturally in the liver, and we can get a small amount from foods. So, this would be things like red meat and fish, but ultimately, supplementing it can help not only increase our muscle stores, but in turn help to support strength and performance in the gym, right? So, oftentimes people feel like they can kind of push through that next rep or that next set a little easier. But it's also been shown to be helpful for that muscle recovery, right? Which is really, really important if you are trying to gain muscle. It's not as helpful if we get super sore after a workout and then you can't get back to the gym for a week, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where creatine can be extremely helpful. And just like you had mentioned, there's lots of emerging research now coming out discussing more of the cognitive benefits of creatine. So we look at things like memory support and focus and overall cognitive function. We also see benefits for mood. So there's lots of research showing its efficacy with depression. And so I think this is, really exciting research, truthfully, that, we can kind of not only see creatine in the sports performance space, but also all of these other benefits that it can offer our patients.
Absolutely. I love it. Another supplement we get asked about a lot is collagen. So, what are your thoughts? Should it be included? I mean, of course, it's not a one size fits all, but let's chat about collagen a bit.
Absolutely. And so collagen, why it can be helpful is because there is research to support that it can help with skin elasticity, it can help with joint health, it can help with bone strength, especially if it's combined with vitamin C and a protein-rich diet. While collagen, though, is not a complete protein, it can certainly be a helpful add-on to support, connective tissue as estrogen begins to drop. I would say ultimately protein is probably still number one, right? Like making sure we're getting adequate amounts is most important, but collagen can still certainly help supplement what you're getting through your diet, right? So certainly not opposed. It's not my number one, right? I'm going to certainly want to ask how much protein you're having in a day first, but there is definitely a lot of research to support its benefits.
Yeah. And I think that's really surprising, isn't it? Like when we ask patients to kind of go through what we call a diet recall. So tell us what your typical day of eating looks like. And we're really understanding and highlighting those gaps in, how much protein they are actually not having, right? Or things that they thought were protein rich that actually aren't. So, even checking in with yourself if you're listening, go through a day of eating and start to think about not the calories, but like, are you getting enough protein? Are you getting that, 1.4 to 1.8 grams per kilogram? And start to think about that. And then, once you establish that baseline, then you can start to think about, okay, like, do I need collagen or any of these extra things to help supplement my current routine, right?
Exactly. And that's where, like you said, it's about stepping away from the calories, right? And actually learning about the nutritional value that a food gives us. And that's where I find, sure, looking at the label of a food is helpful, right? It's helpful to learn how much protein is in a food. It's also helpful to look at the fiber and the sugar and all of these other things that we can talk about at a later time. But all to say, yeah, it's really enlightening to learn what foods are actually high in protein and also just tips for how to sneak it in more throughout the day.
Exactly. I love it. So we're learning a lot about muscle and, how it can influence so many different areas of our health. But let's talk about a really important area to think about, especially in those perimenopause and menopause years, our metabolic health. So we're often talking about, blood glucose levels, our A1C, insulin levels, lipids, etc. So let's talk about how muscle can actually improve these areas of health too.
For sure. So we can, again, think of muscle mass as that glucose sink, right? It helps to soak up that glucose from our bloodstream to then be stored as glycogen and then used for fuel. And so this is why, having more muscle mass helps to improve our sensitivity to insulin. And in turn, we see benefits for, our HbA1c, which is our 3-month average of our blood sugar. And we see improvements in that fasting glucose and fasting insulin. We also see improved lipid profiles. So strength training has been shown to increase HDL, which is known as our air quotes, good cholesterol. It's been also shown to help reduce triglycerides and lower our LDL, which is our kind of bad cholesterol. Strength training and having more lean muscle mass has been also shown to help reduce fat in our liver. And so this has especially been noted in people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we can see lots of long-term health benefits from a metabolic standpoint. We also see that muscle is extremely anti-inflammatory. And so IL-15 is essentially a myokine that's released by our muscles during exercise. And this myokine has been shown to help lower inflammation. We also see that muscle mass has been shown to reduce other inflammatory markers like CRP and IL-6 and TNF-alpha. For all of those listening who don't care about what the names are, the main point behind this is that these markers have all been linked to inflammation, chronic illness, heart disease, depression. And so all to say, this is how muscle mass can not only improve our metabolic health markers alone, but also help reduce inflammation in our body, which sets us up better for those long-term health benefits.
Absolutely. And as we know, inflammation is another one of those pillars of health that we focus on, especially in menopause and beyond. So I love it. I think that's so, we don't often think about muscle as anti-inflammatory. So it's such a good point, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, we've talked about so much. So where should we go next? Let's talk about, how muscle mass and, building this muscle strength. I want to focus on that quality of life piece and that healthy aging piece. You've talked a lot about, empowering women to use their muscle and think about their health in that way. So how can we see building muscle mass improve that independence as we age and that healthy aging overall?
Absolutely. So why muscle can help support our independence is because it helps to improve our balance, right? And our coordination and our overall functional strength. So we see an improvement in things that you don't often think about, but carrying your groceries, right? From, your car inside, or maybe it's getting up off the floor, or maybe it's climbing the stairs, right? And playing with your grandkids. It's all of those daily acts of living too that actually play a huge role in our independence. And why it's so important to have that functional strength is so that we can live those long, healthy life. It's also really important to note the mental health benefits, right? So I know some of this is what I've already discussed, but strength training has also been shown to help boost dopamine and both serotonin, right? Which we know have strong benefits for supporting our mood and our cognitive function. And I think one of the biggest ones too is strength training helps not only reduce cortisol, so it helps with that nervous system component, but it also helps our resilience to stress, which I think as we age is incredibly important, right? We're always going to have things thrown at us in life. And of course, we're always going to support someone's nervous system when they're sitting in front of us, but it's also, we want to empower our patients to feel like they can better handle what life throws at them. And I really do think the benefits that muscle mass and strength training can have from a confidence, an independence, and a mental health standpoint all help to really build someone's resilience to stress that they face in their life.
I love it. I think that's so important. Now that we know the importance of muscle mass, I want you to tell us, especially as with your knowledge as a personal trainer and the kinesiology background, what should we actually do to help build that muscle mass?
For sure. So my number one tip is to, if you are thinking about building a workout, right? What does that look like? And so the first thing is we want to really focus on those key movements. So this might be things like a squat, like a lunge, or a deadlift, right? And why these exercises are so helpful is because they are working multiple joints and major muscle groups at once, which in turn provides more benefits for, mobility and posture and coordination. But this is why these exercises are really a foundation of a workout. We also want to include what are called push movements. So this is going to be things like a bench press or things like an overhead press. We also can include movements that focus more on pull. So this is things like a row or a pull-up or a lat pull-down, for example. All to say, these are the main compound movements that really help to build the most strength and work as many muscle groups as possible in our workouts. In terms of structure, right? And this is a question we always get asked is, so how often do I need to work out? For a beginner status, I would typically recommend 2 to 3 full body workouts a week. At this stage, less is more. We really want to focus on proper form because we don't want to risk injury, right? And that's something that can set us back even further. And so, like I had mentioned before, if someone has never done these movements before, it might be helpful to hire a coach to really learn the proper techniques. Or there's tons of YouTube videos out there, right, that help kind of give those step-by-step guides. But ultimately, learning those foundational movements is key. Someone who's more intermediate level, we might want to include more of a 4-day workout plan. So this could include, 2 days that are, let's say, more lower body focused and 2 days that are more upper body focused. Ultimately, though, like I kind of said before, it's about meeting the person where they're at, right? So I would never want to recommend to someone, let's say, a 4-day workout plan, right? If they already know they can only make it to the gym 2 to 3 times. It's really about wanting to make that person feel successful, right? And feel like they can actually attain the goal that they're setting for themselves. And so if that means going to the gym less, that's okay. It's just how can we optimize that workout so that they can really get the most while they're there.
I think that's so important. And even, to touch on what we talked about earlier, things like yoga, Pilates, right? Like if you have that Pilates membership, this doesn't mean, cancel it and only focus on, strength training or weight training 2 to 4 times a week. There's going to be that perfect blend of what's going to work for you, your lifestyle, and your current activity and skill level as well. Right. So
Exactly.
I think that's important to remember.
Yeah.
There's not a one size fits all approach.
Exactly. And it's always about finding what a person is actually going to stick to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if their heart and soul loves Pilates and yoga, I'm always going to support that. It's all about just meeting the person where they're at and just, making them aware of all of the benefits that different types of exercise can provide.
Totally. Now, something else that I'd love to pick your brain about, because we hear a lot about this, we know that it's all over our Instagram feeds. How do we properly fuel before and after workouts? I know that, understanding, like we talked about, our insulin glucose metabolism and how that's impacting things and, where we're starting is obviously important. But I'm sure there are some key takeaways to think about in terms of fueling before and after workouts.
For sure. And so that sort of pre-workout meal, we want to have something about 60 to 90 minutes before our workout. And the reason for this is we want to give our bodies enough time for optimal digestion, right? We don't want to feel uncomfortable as we're about to start a workout, but how we formulate this meal is important. And so the goal here is to really provide sustained energy, stabilize blood sugar, and avoid that blood sugar drop that can happen during a workout if we don't properly compose this meal. So we really want to ensure that this meal has a carbohydrate source, right, which is going to be where we get our fuel and our energy from for the workout, but that it's also balanced with a protein and a bit of fat. So, for example, this might look like, some oatmeal with a bit of protein powder, berries, and topped with a bit of walnuts. Or maybe it's something like, a banana with nut butter on toast, right? And so really it's ensuring that this meal is balanced, right? So we're not having that crash during our workout, but that we are still getting an adequate amount of carbohydrates to help fuel our workout and allow us to push ourselves through it. In terms of that post-workout meal, so here we really want to refuel ourselves within about 30 minutes to 2 hours post-workout for optimal recovery. And so the goal here with this meal is to help replenish our glycogen stores, and it's to help provide proper fuel for our muscle repair and to, of course, again, stabilize insulin and blood sugar, right? A common theme that we keep talking about. And so here we want to really make sure we're aiming for a minimum of about 30 grams of protein to support more of that tissue repair, as well as some carbohydrates. And so this meal, maybe it looks like some chicken with a bit of sweet potato, some vegetables, and a drizzle of olive oil, for example, right? So we have a good amount of protein, we have some fiber and healthy fats, but we also do have some carbohydrates to replenish those glycogen stores again.
Very good options. And I think something that comes up all the time that patients ask us, is it okay to work out while you're still fasting? So before you've actually eaten breakfast? And is it also okay to go work out after dinner? So you're not going to have anything after that workout? What are your thoughts?
So great question. And there's honestly a lot of debate online too that women read. And so I personally have found, and at least in the latest research, that fasted workouts for women are really not always optimal, right? And I think this is also, in combining with our nervous system, right? But also we do want some sort of fuel in the morning for that workout. And so this can be something small, right? It doesn't need to be a full meal, because I also completely understand if someone's working out early in the morning, they might not have the stomach for a full meal, right? But even something like, 15 grams of protein, maybe that's a shake and a banana, right? So it's a small, I wouldn't even call it a meal. It's like a snack almost that's still balanced is, I would say, the most important. And then when it comes to the evening workouts, so I would have to ask someone, how is their sleep, right? And so when we work out, we're going to feel more energized after, we're going to feel more awake. And so if that person's workout at night is then impairing their ability to fall asleep and have a restful sleep, that's when I would maybe want to have a conversation about how can we fit it in at a different time throughout the day.
Or even just rethinking if it's not like a full dinner after that exercise, if it's something a little smaller, like
exactly
something like fats with some fiber or something like that.
Exactly. But, yeah. What are your thoughts on the fasting workouts?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think that you raise a good point, right? Like we want to focus on the fuel sources. I think the feedback we get from patients a lot is like, yeah, if they're like on the go, like exercise is the first thing in the morning, they may not even be hungry yet for something, but maybe reframing it as not a meal, but just like a snack that can help their performance in that workout. And then also reminding yourself, like, if you're not working out every day, that doesn't mean you're eating that early every day, right? So all this to say, I think there's room for everything if it makes sense in your lifestyle and your current health goals. So we just meet you where you're at with that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then
Mhm.
customize our recommendations to the person sitting in front of us, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
schedule that they have and the goals that they have. And yeah, all the factors that go into what we discuss with them.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
You have taught us so much about muscle and how much of a powerhouse it is. I think the key takeaways that I have learned from today is, the importance of resistance training, how much it can really help us as we age, not only just for, our body composition, but improving our hormones, our metabolism, and, protecting our health, our bones, our brain, our heart health long term. I love that as a whole, we're reframing how we think about perimenopause as a window of opportunity, right? So this is a time to shift our habits before we see some bigger changes once menopause does hit. So really thinking of it as that key sweet spot to start understanding these changes happening in your body and what we can do about it. And that it can be simple. It doesn't have to be 5 days a week hitting the gym, heavy lifting, but it can start with, 2 days a week or even 1 day a week if that's all we can afford. But I think you've given us some really good food for thought, Laura, about how we can really make these impactful changes in perimenopause and beyond to optimize our health.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm so happy we got to talk about this today. And yeah.
And if there was one key takeaway that I want, that you would like to give the listeners out there, what would it be?
I really want our listeners to know that resistance training is not just for athletes and bodybuilders. It's truly one of the best tools that we have for our long-term health. And I really want women in particular to think of muscle as our hormonal ally, right? It helps us age well. It helps us stabilize our hormones, improve our metabolism, and protect our long-term health. And I think it's really about wanting to inspire women that it's not about getting smaller, it's about getting stronger. And that strength really ripples into other areas of your life. And so that's why I'm really passionate about this topic. And I'm really happy we got to speak about it today.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and teaching us all something new today. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.